Oh, okay, the projector will come back. Second Samuel chapter 22. I'm going to read verse 30. For by you I can run against a troop. By my God, I can leap over a wall. And then I want to turn to Psalm 18. And verse 29, and this should sound very familiar. For by you I can run against a troop. By my God, I can leap over a wall. And the reason I read that verse was long ago, more than a decade ago, I don't remember when it was, I was reading one of these verses and I'm like, hey, wait a second, that sounds really familiar. I saw that somewhere else, right? Actually, the entire psalm is repeated, and we're going to look at it more in a little bit. But it really got me thinking, why would God put the same thing in the Bible in two different places? He puts the exact same thing in two different places. Why does he use up space that way? Why did he do that, right? So it's something that I started thinking about, I don't know, more than a decade or whatever, and it's been in my thoughts ever since, here and there, right? So today we're going to talk about this, and this is actually a continuation on a message I gave in August here about, electronic attack and how we know that the message from God is secure and not tampered with. How we know this about our scripture. So just a review, I had this slide last time in August, and we talked about the electronic attacks, countermeasures. Today we're in section 3. I have section 4. We're not going to get there today, not here, but section 3, right? We want to talk about redundancy in scripture, and we're going to see that it creates this added layer of security for us, and it also creates security in the way we interpret it. It gives us added information about things. So this is just a review of the electronic attack thing we talked about. So if you remember, if you were here in August, I don't know why there's a mouse arrow here, but it probably doesn't matter. I had this example where I had this text from me to Laura, right? And I was like, an example of an electronic attack here in this text. This was sort of fictitious. Back when Laura and I were first dating, she came to DC for her cousin's wedding, and we had ulterior motives, right? We were going to meet up. She was going to hang out with me, right? But anyways, we didn't really have texting back then, but I had this example, like, let's say I was texting Laura and telling her to meet downtown in Washington, D.C. at the World War II Memorial in front of the Michigan section at 10 a.m., right? And this is where we met, at the Michigan section of the World War II Memorial. But if some bad actor wanted to attack this message, you could change it from the World War II Memorial to the Lincoln Memorial. I did this, right? You could do some stealthy attack, and Laura would never know that it was being attacked. And instead of the Michigan section, the pillar, there's a Michigan pillar on the Lincoln Memorial. Every state has a pillar, and then change the time. And if you did this, you would confuse the message by just messing with it a little bit. And this is like an example of an attack. And we were thinking about how do we know this doesn't take place with our Bible? And then we had this example of encryption. I had this slide, right? And here, there's an encryption scheme here where if you see an F, you change it to an E, because E is the letter right before F, right? If you see an O, N comes before O in the alphabet, and you shift everything one letter, and then you get out garbage. And the point of that was many things the Bible tells us from the Old Testament, prophecies about the Lord, you don't know that they're prophecies about the Lord. For instance, throw it to the potter in the house of the Lord, speaking of Judas betraying Jesus and throwing the money back. Prior to that happening, you have no idea what that means. And I don't think anyone figured that out correctly before it happened, because it's encrypted. You're not going to get it. So this is one of the protections. And then this would be an example. If you had to be able to decrypt this, it would be much harder to attack it because you don't really know what to attack, right? So that was that example. And then I had this frequency hopping countermeasure, and I don't know if any of you remember the garage door, but the garage door opener has this, at least some of them have these frequency hoppers in it. And I know that because reading the manual for my minivan when I bought it, it was telling me how to program the garage door opener and said, do this or this or this or this. If that still doesn't work, you have a frequency hopper. You need to follow these instructions. And I was like, really? I had no idea that garage doors got that high tech. Now, this is my in-laws garage door in Michigan. I doubt it has a frequency hopper, but most of them probably don't. This is probably a high-end thing, I would guess, but I know it exists because of the minivan instructions. And we thought about how when there are prophecies about the Lord Jesus, there's not like one book of prophecies about the Messiah. If God had done it that way, there would be an all-out assault to try to discredit that book. But because it's spread across many, many books in the Old Testament, you can try as hard as you want. Let's say you could theoretically discredit some book in the Old Testament. It changes nothing, right? It changes nothing. Why? Because it's spread out. So if you attack it, you're not really changing anything. You have to really take out large portions of the Old Testament before the prophetic picture is gone. So it makes the Bible strong against attacks from people trying to discredit it. Redundancy in Scripture is what we're talking about today. Here's an example, aside from the one I read at the beginning, of redundant passages. And this is a verse that most of us know. In Isaiah chapter 2, in verse 4, we have, he shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, this is, written on some like United Nations plaque. Man can't pull this off, right? But anyway, in Micah chapter 4, we have almost, and I'm going to say almost the same thing. And there's actually a little bit of a switch here. He shall judge between the nations, and it says many peoples in Micah 4. And then the second line, and rebuke many people. And he says strong nation and rebuke strong nations afar off. So he talks about the nations in the purple boxes and many peoples in the green boxes. So there's kind of a little bit of a switch there, right? But other than that, it's the same. And we want to ask this question. Why does God give us information redundantly in the Bible instead of telling us something else with that space? Why would you say the same thing twice, right? This is something I've thought about a lot. Why? Is the Bible the right length? Now, I'm going to say, if you ask, should it be 1% longer or 1% shorter? I can't answer that question, right? I can't answer that question. But if we take the Bible as we have it now, imagine if it were 10 times longer. So for every part of the Bible that you read, divide the number of times you've read that by 10. I think many of us would be pretty fuzzy on many parts of the Bible, right? If we divided the amount that we read it by 10. If it were 10 times longer, it would be hard for us to keep track of it, right? It would be a lot. It would be hard to keep track of it all. I don't think the Bible being 10 times longer is the right size for us as human beings, given our brains, right? What if it's 10 times shorter? Is that too short, right? If it's 10 times shorter, how long would it be if it were 10 times shorter? I took a shot I just took a guess, right? And my guess was maybe it'll be the length of the 4 Gospels. That's 10% of the Bible. I asked my friend ChatGPT, what percentage of the Bible are the 4 Gospels? And this is the answer I got. The 4 Gospels make up approximately 12.15% of the Bible when considering the total number of verses. So that's what ChatGPT thinks. Whether or not that's correct, I don't know. And what's the right way to measure it? Here he's saying, if you consider the total number of verses, that's what percentage it is. But you could measure it other ways, right? You could say the total number of words, right? You could say the total length of area of paper that it takes up. You can say the total number of syllables, so if you're pronouncing it. So there's different ways to measure it. But if the Bible were only the length of the 4 Gospels, it seems like there's more we could read, right? Seems like there is. Seems like the Bible is a good length for us that God has written to us. And if it's going to be that length, why do you want to say the same thing twice? Why would we want to use up space, limited space, saying the same thing twice? Why wouldn't God tell us something different? You know, if I were to write a letter, actually imagine the scenario. Your daughter or your sibling is at girls' camp at Greenwood Hills, and you're trying to write her a letter, and there's like some length limit on what you can send them. You probably don't want to tell them the same thing twice, right? You wouldn't want to, because you only have so much space. You're going to want to use it to tell them something else. You're going to want to tell them something different. So why does God give us redundancy? And I want to say, we looked at passages that were nearly identical. There's also topologically redundant passages where, and I'm not claiming that this is all of them, these are just some that I took up, where basically 2 portions of the Bible are telling you the same story. You know, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are kind of duplicated in Deuteronomy, at least large parts of them, right? It covers the same ground. 1st and 2nd Kings are fairly duplicated with 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Yes, there's different details in each one, but the general story is the same topic, right? At least partially. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all talk about the Lord's life. They're all talking about it, right? They're like redundant versions of the same story. They're not identical, they're different, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But there's these redundant topics, but there's also the redundant passages. So we want to think of the redundant passages first. And here's something to think about. Both the Old Testament and New Testament have passages that are topologically redundant, the same topics. But only the Old Testament has separate passages with identical or near identical texts. Why would that be? And by the way, I may be wrong about this. Maybe there's some long portion of the New Testament that's identical more than take, eat, this is my body or something. You know, there are these sentences that will appear more than once, but as far as a longer piece of text that's the same, I could not think of one. That doesn't mean that there's one that was eluding me. I couldn't think of one. In the Old Testament, there's multiple examples. But we don't see this identical thing in the New Testament. And please tell me after the meeting if you think of one. But I couldn't think of one. So anyway, the near identical passages. Let's go to, or let's think about 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18. Nope, that's not what this is. This is Psalm 14 and Psalm 53 first. Psalm 14 and Psalm 53. Now, it's probably hard for you to read it since you're back there and the screen's up here. So you can turn to them if you want. Psalm 14 is on the left. Psalm 53 is on the right. And I need to explain these boxes that I've made here. So basically what the scheme is if you see a green box on this side, that means the word is different, but it's the exact same meaning as this side, right? So if there's nothing there, then the text is identical. If I put a blue box on this side, that means there's something over here that does not appear on that side. If I put a red text box here, this is on this side, but it does not appear on this side, okay? So green boxes, different word, same meaning, and we'll see this. If we look at Psalm 14 in verse 1, in this line here, they have done abominable works. But on this line, oh, I guess I missed something here. They are corrupt and have done abominable iniquity, right? So it means the same thing, but it's different wording, right? Verse 2, we start with the Lord here, whereas this Psalm 53, it says God. Verse 3, they have all, and over here, every one of them has, right? Means the same thing, means the exact same thing, but different word. You know, down here in this one, and do not call on the Lord, and over here, and do not call upon God, right? Means the exact same thing, at least if you don't scrutinize it too hard in general, right? But it's a different word. Really, the only difference is right here and right here, right? It says this over here, it says this over here. Other than that, we have the same psalm twice with these differences in words. And I want to think about how, as people were copying these texts, this is what people that criticize the Bible will say. You copy it, and there gets to be more and more noise as you go along. Every time you copy it, it gets more messed up. And you can kind of think of this as the original, and as time goes on, it gets more and more messed up, and you kind of get a spread on what the text says, and it says different things. And someone may point to a text like this and say that, and we're going to see in a minute why that's not true. Or you might say, maybe it's really messed up, like all these green dots, or maybe it's really tight, like the red dots, right? How messed up does it get as time moves forward is something we want to think about. And even worse than it getting messed up, does it start taking trajectories? Does our text start like going somewhere else and it's no longer the original? So if this is what the text said at the beginning and we follow this forward here, we have these different texts here, but even if you take all the average of them and try to like recreate the original, you're going to be down here instead of up here. Now, I don't know if that picture makes sense, but hopefully it does. Does it do that, right? That's always a question we got to ask or think about. Let's go to 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18. And here we have the longest example of redundant text or near identical text in the Old Testament. So once again, if you see a green box, it means the same thing, but it's a different word. It means the same thing, but it's a different word. So if you see a red box over here, then it's not on this side. And if you see a blue box over here, it's not on that side, right? So we're looking at this. So you can see Psalm 18 starts with, I love you, O Lord, my strength, which does not appear in 2 Samuel chapter 22. But then we pick up and start reading. Now, just to confuse us, verse 3 over here is verse 2 over here, and it's basically shifted by one verse just to make our lives hard. But we can see here, it's pretty much the same. This is actually the worst page. There's a few more slides of this, but up here we start off with the God of my strength versus my God, my strength. Same meaning, right? A little bit different wording, same meaning. Right here, when the waves of death surrounded me, and over here we have the pangs of death surrounded me, right? Same meaning, different word. Down here, and my cry entered his ears, and my cry came before him even to his ears. Same meaning. All the green boxes have the same meaning, and we can kind of look at this picture and think about this. How different are the two? They're very similar, but we have these words with the same meaning. Here's the next slide, next bunch of verses. On this one, we only have these two red squares. Everything else is green, right? Same meaning, slightly different wording, right? Very slightly different wording. That's the same meaning. We can go on. Once again, on this page, we have one blue box here. We have two red boxes here, and then there's some green boxes. We'll go to the last one. Now this gets a little bit interesting in 2 Samuel 22, verse 45, which is verse 44 over here. These two lines are flipped. So in 44, we say, as soon as they hear of me, they obey me. The foreigners submit to me. And in 2 Samuel 22, the foreigners submit to me. As soon as they hear, they obey me. So we reverse the order there. So that was interesting. We have a blue box, two blue boxes, I guess. Two red boxes. I guess we have a red box in there, and then a green. So it's pretty similar. I'm just gonna flip back through it again so we can get the picture. These two are very similar we have the instances where we have the, same meaning, different word. And then you have those few instances where the wording is different, right? Now, if scribes had messed this up, you're a scribe and you're copying, right? If you make a mistake, what is the probability that you will happen to make a mistake that has the same meaning as the original? It's low, right? Are you going to do it this many times? Look at how many green boxes there are. Are you going to do that? You happen to put down the same meaning. You messed up, but you happen to put down the same meaning every time you see a green box. And the answer is no, right? Like, it's too many times. There's no way that's all accidents. There was intentional changing of the wording. Now, why would they change the wording here? And I want to note, here's 2 Samuel 22, that's Psalm 18. Why would you change the wording on this intentionally? And because I'm saying it's not an accident, at least the green boxes. We can argue about the red boxes, right? Once we accept that all these green boxes were intentionally changed, then I think the red boxes, you can say they may have also been intentionally changed. But at least the green boxes, you're not going to put the word that means the exact same thing down that many times when you're copying these, right? If these were both the same exact text originally and scribes messed up and created the differences, there is no way they would have made that many coincidental mistakes that have the same meaning. Now, I want to think about Psalm 23 and a hymn that many of us probably know, this hymn over here, right? We have this hymn, it's probably in our hymnal. If Haley Tate were here, you could probably tell us what the person who wrote it was eating for breakfast the day he was inspired. I can't do that, but we have this hymn that many of us know, right? The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. And that's how the 23rd Psalm starts. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. They match, right? But then we keep going. In verse 2 of the 23rd Psalm, he makes me to lie down in green pastures. In this hymn, we write, he makes me down to lie in pastures green. Why do we do that? It's to make it fit the music, right? It's to make it work with the music. The person who wrote this hymn did not make a mistake when they were writing the lyrics to this hymn. They changed it to have the same meaning, but slightly different wording because they needed it to fit the music, right? We can go on. He leadeth me beside the still waters in Psalm 23. He leadeth me the quiet waters by, in this hymn that, in this hymn. Once again, change to fit the music. You can't make the music work over here if you're, trying to have the words repeated exactly. So there are reasons, especially when you see something in the Psalms, why you would intentionally make things slightly different. Oh, Haley Tate just texted me pancakes. He was eating pancakes when he wrote that hymn. So it's good to know he was paying attention. So anyway, you will change it. There are reasons you would change it to make it work with the music. So it's especially when you see the book of Psalms, like, okay, that might be a reason why someone would change it. Now, what does this tell me that, I'm going to say all the green boxes were done intentionally, or, you got to at least admit most of them had to have been done intentionally, because you can't randomly put in the equivalent meaning word, right? You do this for musical reasons, right? David wrote this as poetry originally, and then it's probably used in temple worship over on the other side, and they had to change it because 400 years had gone by and they like different beats and they pronounce words differently or whatnot, right? So there are these slight changes. Now, this is actually really good that we have these slight changes, because what does it tell me? First, we can look at all the parts that don't have any box on them, right? They copied these really well, because when you're copying 2 Samuel, you're not paying attention to what that Psalm 18 scroll says. And when you're copying Psalm 18, you're not paying attention to what 2 Samuel 22 says. And proof that you're not paying attention to the other one is the words are slightly different. So if you have slightly different wording, you know that you're not just, when we write down 2 Samuel 22, we copy the 2 Samuel 22 scroll. When we go to Psalm 18, we look back at the 2 Samuel 22 scroll. They're copying two different things because the wording is slightly different and it's intentionally slightly different. But look at all the parts that are the same. They like nailed this, right? They nailed this. There's no like deviation. If the text were changing over time, we would expect to see random departures between these two passages or other similar ones. They would spread out, right? It'd spread out and you would see more and more differences here. You'd see more and more differences. But we know that the guys copying this did a great job because these two did not depart from each other and they have known differences. So they're not just all looking at 2 Samuel 22, for instance, when they copy both of these. They're copying two separate things, but they get the same thing again and again across the centuries. Let me go on. You know, this is not always true. I took this class once years ago where we had to read this play, Sophocles' Antigone. And you know, there's some English words on the cover, but once you open it, this is all you have, right? And in this class, the way it works is we were told which like pages we were going to read in class each week. And then you had to go and we kind of went around the circle and you had to read and translate. And the only way you're going to do this, unless you're a really good student, is if you find the English version on the internet and you help yourself in advance so that you can be ready. Well, this is not like the Bible, because when you go to the internet and you find the English version, sometimes entire pages are not in that version on the internet. Sometimes in your Greek text, one person says some line, but in the version on the internet, somebody else said it. Because these things are not close to each other